India, as we mentioned earlier, became the world's most populous country, but still, not enough jobs, especially for women, are being created to support this huge population. Rahika Bajaj has more.
A burgeoning population of 1.4 billion plus, of which 48% are women. But only 1 out of 5 women work in India, as per World Bank data from 2021. Women made up only 23% of India's formal and informal workforce that year, down from nearly 27% in 2005. Societal and family considerations often lead to them dropping out. And there are several other factors.
Families are not very sure of the security of at the workplace, lack of transport, lack of creche facilities, so many things. It's very important for a woman to have the right kind of ecosystem where she is able to work without any of these stresses and tensions.
It's not just women who lose out when they can't work. Achieving gender parity in workforce participation can boost India's GDP by 27%. Out of 146 countries, India ranked 135th in the World Economic Forum's Gender Gap Index 2022. That's up 5 spots from 2021. The hope is that younger women with better education and ambitions to be financially independent will continue to join the workforce. And while continued societal and policy support is critical to enable them, immediate attention is also required towards another growing and vulnerable part of the Indian population, the elderly. Currently, 7% of Indians are above the age of 65 years. This will nearly double to touch 192 million by 2030. Non-governmental organizations working with elders say cases of elderly abuse and abandonment have been rising. While there are many government policies targeting the elderly, experts say they are largely tokenistic.
So on one hand, the policy draft makers are people who are young themselves. On the other hand, the politicians are not interested in old people as a vote bank. So therefore, there is very limited policy which comes out. 1. 2. Whatever policies are made more on paper. When we are talking in terms of ground realities are completely different.
Advocacy groups say it is critical that the silver generations are given every opportunity to be financially independent, whether it is through monetary government support or finding those willing suitable jobs. Another area is high costs of healthcare and medicines. Most surveys show that for elders, this is a major expense. And what every stakeholder agrees on is that the time to address these issues and plan for the decades ahead is now. Radhika Bajaj, CGTN, Mumbai.
For more on the world's population and the future, we're joined by John Wilmoth, who you just saw earlier in the story. He's director of the Population Division at the UN. Thank you for taking time to join us on this. And this is a topic I think many of us have been fascinated with ever since we studied the first history books, is how big will the Earth's population grow to when we get older? And I guess we got the answer. It's now 8 billion. In all countries, they go through a cycle. When they're poor and developing, they tend to have more children. And as it becomes more developed, they tend to have less children, partially because of the cost, or they go into the workforce and they just simply don't have time, perhaps, for the kids. India has surpassed China now, and I think this is very fascinating. It's made a few headlines, but I feel like we don't talk about it enough. How did India get here so quickly?
So quickly, I mean, compared to China, it got here to this point, much less quickly in some sense. It's taking its time, you might say, as it goes through the process of the demographic transition, the decline of fertility, and all that implies in terms of transforming the population from one that is growing, that has a high fertility rate and is relatively young, to a population that's much older, not growing anymore, and with a much lower fertility rate. And the world's countries are on this continuum between those two extremes, and India has been going through that process more slowly than China. So I mean, the ultimate result of this process is if fertility rates fall to relatively low levels, then countries start to decline in population size. And China reached that point last year. And other countries have done that also and have been declining in size. But there are others that are still growing very rapidly because they're still kind of in the early phases of this demographic transition that all of the world is going through.
Yeah, if you issued a report 10 years from now about the state of the world, the population, and the trends, what do you think it would say?
If we had done it, what, 10 years ago?
10 years from now.
Well, from now, what's it going to say? Well, you know, I think the discussion around population hasn't changed a lot. It's been there's been alarmism on the one hand, and then there's been you know, an urging of caution and let's not go overboard in terms of what this implies, because we've seen in the past often great concern about the growth of the human population and concern that we would run out of resources and destroy the world. And we so far have found pretty good ways to address the issues. I think the climate crisis is really almost of another level. I worry about it a lot. In order, you know, really addressing that one effectively is not going to be easy. It really takes some serious reworking of our economy and our way of life, frankly, to avoid the worst effects of climate change at this point. I think that's very important to consider how much needs to change if we really are serious about stopping the impact of humans on the environment, which is causing climate change.
I hosted a panel a few years ago with the IMF, and it was specifically about what to do with the aging population, as there's less youth to take care of a growing aging population. For example, if you only have one child or no child at all, someone has to take care of the folks that as they get older with the health issues, money issues, and so on. And we're seeing that now, obviously in the US, you're seeing that in Europe, you're seeing that in China, and in many, many countries around the world. And my main concern is, while the healthcare needs continue to grow, the resources aren't there when it comes to manpower. I'm not talking about just money, but just having the kids to help mom and dad or grandma and grandpa. There's less kids to go around to provide that assistance. And this is, I don't think it's being discussed enough, but this seems to be a very, very serious issue.
Well, it's something, though, that it's easier for me with this issue to imagine solutions. It's easier to think about how can we rearrange our lives in such a way that we address this issue of making sure that all older persons have proper care. You know, we can change many things. People are very worried about the decline of the size of the workforce, for example, but we can also change how many people are working at different ages. We can bring older persons into the labor market instead of, you know, expecting that everybody retires at a fixed age. We can allow that age to go up, and that then expands the size of the working age population, and we can bring more women into the workforce. In many countries, that will make a big difference to expanding the size of the workforce. So that the concern about the decline, the imminent decline of population, what effect that's going to have, because it'll destroy the economy, because it will reduce the working age population. Yes, eventually the working age population will start to decline in a country like China. The total population started to decline last year, and the working age population will start to decline eventually. But will that spell disaster? There are many options. Bring more women into the workforce, let older persons work, and find other ways of working, that are more productive to deal with these issues. So I know it seems like it's a problem. It's a very pressing issue. It's a long-term trend that you have to think about and address, but it's not impossible. For these sorts of things, for these sorts of social changes, I think we can adapt. The physical reality of climate change and humans' consumption of fossil fuels, that is a much more difficult problem to solve.
Yeah, and a very important one. John, really appreciate your time on this, and happy World Population Day to you, and hopefully we'll get a chance to discuss some more solutions down the road. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Sure.